Everyone, and welcome to our 2021 annual public meeting. Please note that today's event is being recorded. Bonjour et bienvenue à l'Assemblée publique annuelle de 2021 de la
Hello and welcome to the 2021 annual public meeting for HMCS, and this is going to be a recorded event.
Senior Vice President of People and Strategy, I will be emceeing today's conference call. Je suis accompagnée aujourd'hui par le président.
I am joined here today with the chair of the board of directors of the CMHC, Derek Ballantyne, and our president first directors, Romy Bowers.
Today, including our Chief Financial Officer, Chief Risk Officer, Senior Vice Presidents of Policy and Innovation, Client Operations, Client Solutions, as well as their Chief Economist. A number of CMHC employees have also joined our YouTube live meeting from locations across the country. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that we will use a bilingual format for the meeting today.
This conference will happen in both official languages.
From Mr. Ballantyne and Ms. Bowers, who will provide brief opening remarks. We will then turn things over to Lisa Williams, CMHC's Chief Financial Officer, who will present highlights from the 2020 annual report, The Sanctuary of a Home. Après la présentation de notre chef des finances, Lisa Williams.
Following the presentation from our CFO, Lisa Williams, we have a Q&A session for 20 minutes, especially for the members of the media who are with us today. This question period will be managed by Jonathan Rotondo, who is the main specialist in media relations. The telephone conversation in the annual public meeting will conclude after that question and answer period. So having said this, I will invite Derek Ballantyne
to say a few words. Derek, la parole est à vous.
Merci Marie-Claude et bonjour à tous qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui.
Thank you so much, Marie-Claude, and thank you for everyone.
The traditional territories of many First Nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And doing so, when I give a traditional territorial acknowledgement, it's also a reminder to me to reflect on the commitments we've made as Canadians and me personally on the implementation of the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. I invite all Canadians to do the same. Merci à vous de vous joindre à nous.
Thank you so much for joining us today from everywhere in the country for this meeting.
And many of us are, all going through a third wave of COVID, and for obviously some communities, it's much more heartfelt than others. But as all of us continue to work and we isolate at home and take refuge, we really are reinforced with the notion that safe housing and a home is critically important. And there's nobody who feels this more than those who are homeless or those who are living in precarious housing. Our aspiration as CMHC continues to be more pertinent than ever to ensure that by 2030, everyone in Canada has a house they can afford and meets their needs. And all of us at CMHC, from the board through to all of the employees, and many of our partners are indeed committed to this aspiration. Over the past year, we've mobilized new programs, which come in addition to those which we've been responsible for some time, to ensure that Canadians have safe refuge, including quite successfully last year, the Rapid Housing Initiative, a second portion of which has been announced in the recent budget. Romy and Lisa will go into these measures in greater detail very shortly.
CMHC also mobilized around other challenges that worry Canadians in terms of equity and fighting against racism to attack the systemic racism within the organization and the housing system in general. We have to consider the fact that we are also at the heart of a system that historically has had some commitments that were racist, and maybe through we would like not to continue in that direction. We've also looked at climate change, the nomination of the first chief of climate change to orient efforts in terms of all of the society, and to be able to face the risks of climate change that is going to affect us all, but especially at the CMHC. And at the same time, we continue to progressing and the implementation of long-term programs in terms of a national strategy on housing. Bilateral agreements with all of the provinces and territories, the creation of a national board, housing board, that will meet different diverse voices, including those who have had experiences in the housing system, people who have experience of being without a home, and discussions on housing policies.
It is a company that Canadians can count on. The recent federal budget is testament to this. It includes new investments of $2.5 billion to be delivered by CMHC and reallocation of $1.3 billion in existing funding to help build, repair, and support 35,000 existing housing units. The board and I will ensure strong stewardship of these public investments so that they deliver maximum benefit to Canadians. In this past year, and most recently, we've also gone through a transition of leadership. We've had the great pleasure of welcoming Romy Bowers as new president and CAO, and a person who is very deeply committed to CMHC, our aspiration, and the health of our organization. And she brings with her some great ideas, values, and experience with CMHC that will really benefit all of us. This comes obviously with also the fact that we had Evan Siddall leave us, who has been with us for like over 7 years now as president and CEO, and left a really significant mark on the organization. Evan, I think, was the inspiration and the drive to take us through a fundamental transformation in the organization, equipped us to be able to be an organization that is responsive and able to deliver on our aspirations and on the commitments we made in terms of the National Housing Strategy. And to Evan, we owe a great thanks, and we wish him all the best in his future endeavors. I'd like
to guarantee, to reassure you that the leadership transition is going to happen smoothly. Romy, the board of directors, and myself are concentrating on our objectives and our strategies, and we have a clear road to follow, and we are following it. I would also like to thank the management and the staff at CMHC for all of their extraordinary efforts throughout this last year. Efforts that are long-term, have lasted a long time, especially we really need to recognize them because it was a terrible year that we've had in front of us.
Of course, ensuring that CMHC continues on an agile, innovative company, and that Canadians can count on us. Thanks again for attending today. And now I'd like to turn things over to Romy Bowers, our new president and CEO.
Merci, Derek. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our annual general meeting for 2021.
Joining you today from Toronto, which, as Derek noted, is the traditional territory of many First Nations and is home today to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I'm very grateful every day for the land on which I work and live. And let me begin by saying how truly deeply grateful and honored I am to be serving as CMHC's new president and CEO. I appreciate greatly the trust that the board and the government have placed in me, as well as the many messages I've received from colleagues across the company. I wanted to assure Canadians that we remain fully committed to our 2030 aspiration to ensure that everyone in Canada has a home they can afford and that meets their needs. We owe a debt of gratitude to our former president, Evan Siddall, for positioning us to deliver on this goal and for his personal commitment to housing affordability for all. My job as a new CEO is to build on the momentum that Evan created, and I can do that with the great support of my colleagues across Canada. Le système canadien de logement a fait face.
Canada's housing system has faced some unprecedented challenges in 2020 with the eclosion of a global pandemic that brought a hard hit in our economy and threatened the health of millions of people. Right from the get-go, CMHC mobilized quickly to be able to mitigate the repercussions on Canadians.
Working with government and non-government partners and stakeholders, we helped ensure the stability of the housing finance system. We protected homeowners against foreclosure and renters from eviction, and we created more affordable housing from coast to coast to coast. For example, as part of the Government of Canada's COVID-19 Economic Response Plan, we introduced a revised insured mortgage purchase program to support our liquidity in our financial system. We also collaborate with lenders and private mortgage insurers to allow homeowners with CMHC insured mortgages to defer payments for up to 6 months. The same relief was offered to our multi-unit clients, enabling them to extend rent relief for their tenants. We advanced funding to ensure that community housing providers and co-ops continue to offer subsidized rent to households in need, and we asked them to refrain from evicting tenants during the pandemic. We also temporarily suspended dividend payments to the federal government, allowing us to conserve capital so that, if needed, we could further support Canadians in the economic recovery through the crisis. The dividend payments were reinstated earlier this year. Given our real estate expertise, the Government of Canada asked CMHC to deliver the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program for small businesses. This program lowered rent by at least 75% for more than 140,000 small businesses experiencing financial hardship due to the pandemic. De nouvelles mesures ont également été introduites dans
New measures were also introduced within the framework of the National Strategy on Housing for more than $70 billion, including the initiative for the quick creation of housing mentioned by the chair, which allows a federal support of $1 billion to build 4,800 affordable housing units that we have urgent need, and this will be over a period of a year.
Some 59,000 new housing units were committed under the National Housing Strategy initiatives. Close to 66,000 existing units were repaired, and our rapid construction financing initiative approved low-cost loans for close to 25,000 new rental units. We have concluded bilateral agreements with several provinces and territories to deliver new funding for community housing and the Canada Housing Benefit. Work is ongoing to finalize remaining agreements and launch applicable programs. To protect homebuyers, to reduce government and taxpayer risk, and support the stability of housing markets while curtailing excessive demand, CMHC further tightened qualification criteria for mortgage loan insurance at mid-year. High levels of household debt continue to be a significant threat to Canada's economic stability, and this was noted by OSFI in their recent proposal to strengthen the stress test for uninsured mortgages. As Derek mentioned, our climate change work gained momentum in 2020. As Canada's National Housing Agency, we have a responsibility to ensure that the massive housing investments we will deliver over the coming decade improve housing affordability in a way that's climate compatible. We also need
to ensure that the risks that we assume within the framework of our commercial activities will mitigate the effects of the events related to climate, such as floodings and fires.
With this in mind, we have developed a strategy that pulls together our various climate change mitigation and adaptation tactics. We appointed our first ever Chief Climate Officer in 2020 to guide this important company-wide effort, which envisions fundamental changes to our housing and housing finance systems. Although CMHC has been strengthening our diversity and our inclusion programs for some time, we recognize that there are still profound gaps in our approach. We took a strong stand on anti-racism and equity in 2020, signing the Black North Pledge and making a series of bold public commitments to fundamentally transform the way we think, the way we act, and we do business when it comes to race and color. While addressing systemic racism and achieving equity in our workplace and housing will take some time, CMHC has started our own anti-racism journey by committing to a plan of action to support Black and other racialized colleagues within our company. Ultimately, our intention is to make CMHC a place where everyone feels like they belong. Among many actions, we established a task force to lead our anti-racism and equity work that will report to CMHC's Executive Committee and CEO. We also created the position of Chief Equity Officer to guide the development and implementation of an anti-racism and equity strategy. Reconciliation with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples is also a critical component of our journey to build an equitable workplace. In 2020, we appointed a special advisor to oversee a new framework for reconciliation that is being guided by Indigenous people. Notre priorité absolue pendant la pandémie.
Our absolute priority throughout the pandemic was to ensure the health and safety, both physical and psychological, of our employees and their families. The workplace that is geared on the row results allows us to offer services and programs that are basic in 2020 and to implement some new measures that were related to COVID-19 that were mentioned previously.
Results only work environment, together with our commitment to support the health and well-being of employees and their families, were key factors that earned CMHC recognition as Canada's top 100 employers in 2021, an accomplishment that we're particularly proud of. Looking to the future, we will be adjusting our corporate strategy beginning this year to reflect our changing environment, specifically the affordability hardships that have been intensified by the pandemic and that are impacting vulnerable populations most heavily. Our strategy adjustments will provide more precision in how we will achieve our 2030 aspiration and measure our progress. To that end, we have defined 3 interconnected outcomes that will accelerate us toward our aspiration. First, people who are vulnerable have reliable access to secure and affordable housing. 2, Canada has the right mix of and number of homes and housing options to serve our diverse needs. And third, but not least importance, Canada's housing system supports sustainability and price stability. As Derek, our chair, noted, over the coming months, we'll also be tasked with implementing new housing measures and investments announced in Budget 2021. This was the 5th consecutive federal budget that included additional funding to be delivered by CMHC. Specifically, Budget 2021 proposes $1.5 billion for our new round of the Rapid Housing Initiative, which is targeted at addressing the urgent needs of vulnerable Canadians impacted by COVID-19. The budget also reallocates $1.3 billion of previously announced funding for the National Housing Co-Investment Fund and Rental Construction Financing Initiative to speed up the construction of new housing and the repair and support of existing units across the country. And in addition, we'll also be implementing a new $4.4 billion program to provide Canadian homeowners and landlords with interest-free loans to undertake deep energy efficient retrofits that will reduce their energy costs and greenhouse gas emissions from the housing sector. All of these measures will help us closer to our 2030 aspiration, and I am confident in our ability to deliver, working with many willing partners and stakeholders across the housing sector. In closing, I want to thank again Evan Siddell for his leadership of CMHC over the past 7 years. I also want to acknowledge the guidance and support of Derek Ballantyne and the entire board of directors as we move towards our aspiration and deliver on our commitments on anti-racism and equity, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and climate change. Enfin, je tiens à remercier les...
Finally, I would like to thank the 2,200 employees for CMHC who went above and beyond in 2020 by making sure that families have an affordable home throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and to sustain the economic stability in Canada throughout this crisis period.
The drive and commitment of our employees have made me prouder than ever of CMHC and the vital role that we play in Canada's housing system. I look forward to working with them and our partners over the next 5 years as we strive to build a more inclusive, equitable society underpinned by affordable housing. And thank you very much for your attention. And now I will turn things over to Lisa Williams, our Chief Financial Officer, to provide additional details on our programs and financial results for 2020. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Romy. Je tiens à souligner que je me...
Thank you, Romy. I'd like to highlight that I'm here with you from Ottawa, the traditional territory, the unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation.
Bold aspiration of ensuring affordability for all by 2030. Everything we do, from supporting the stability of Canada's financial system to delivering affordable housing solutions, is focused on achieving this aspiration. 2020 was marked by unprecedented events that reinforced the importance of safe, sustainable housing and housing that is affordable for everyone in Canada. Throughout the year, CMHC continued to deliver programs and initiatives, including new measures under the Government of Canada's COVID-19 Economic Response Plan, which were touched upon by Romy. We did so while supporting the stability of Canada's financial system during a challenging time. Au nom de tous mes collègues, j'ai le plaisir...
On behalf of all of my colleagues, I have the pleasure to show you the highlights of our financial results in 2020.
Although the pandemic brought significant uncertainty to the Canadian and global economies, CMHC's overall 2020 financial results remain strong. Nos revenus provenant des activités commerciales et du
Our revenue coming from commercial activity and public financing raised $8 billion in 2020.
Government funding for housing programs, driven primarily by new funding to help deliver Canada's COVID-19 Economic Response Plan and ongoing funding of the National Housing Strategy. Les revenus tirés de nos activités commerciales, de l'assurance prêt hypothécaire.
The revenue taken from our commercial activities, from the mortgage loan insurance and also the mortgage financing, raised $3 billion and generated a net of $1.7 billion in 2020. The raise in expense in 2020 is attributed to the increase of the charges of the programs for the housing, combined with the economic intervention plan to be able to answer COVID-19, as well as the continued financing on the National Housing Strategy.
Temporarily suspended dividend payments to our shareholder, the Government of Canada, in 2020. This was a prudent measure to conserve capital due to economic uncertainty caused by the pandemic. CMHC reinstated dividend payments this year, and on March 25th, CMHC's Board of Directors approved a dividend of $3.9 billion, including a $3.5 billion special dividend, which will return excess capital to the Government of Canada for other purposes. As a result of the pandemic, Canada's economy shrank by 5.4% in 2020. Malgré les pertes d'emploi,
despite job losses, available revenue for households has increased due to the temporary financial relief from the government for households and businesses. The debt-to-revenue ratio available for households had decreased slightly at 175% in the fourth quarter of 2020, comparatively to 180% during the first quarter before the pandemic. Nevertheless, the debt revenue ratio, that is available ratio, is still a worry.
Increased throughout the year due to shifting consumer preferences, low interest rate, and temporary government support. These price increases were not, however, supported by economic fundamentals. As a result, Canada's housing market showed a moderate degree of vulnerability at the national level at the end of 2020. CMHC
continues to implement the National Housing Strategy, a 10-year plan that is supported by investments of more than $70 billion that will allow a larger number of Canadians to have a home. I would like to share with you today some of the highlights.
The Construction Financing Initiative provides low-cost insured loans to increase the supply of rental housing. We committed funding for the construction of close to 25,000 units in 2020. Also during the year, funding for the RCFI was increased by $12 billion as part of the fall economic statement. Nous avons continué de mettre en œuvre le Fonds national.
We continue implementing the National Co-Investment Fund for housing, and last year we committed funds to be able to construct more than 12,400 affordable housing units, as well as the repair and the renewal of close to 66,000 affordable houses throughout the country.
The $1 billion Rapid Housing Initiative beginning in September. This program has significantly exceeded expectations. At year end, we had committed funding for the creation of over 3,400 new permanent affordable homes across the country, compared to the initial estimate of 3,000. Available funding will allow us to support even more units in 2021. Phase 2 of the Federal Community Housing Initiative was launched on September 1st, providing rent assistance to over 5,000 low-income households. Transactional homeowner insurance protects lenders against borrower default, enabling qualified borrowers with a down payment between 5 and 20% to access mortgage financing at competitive rates. En 2020, nos produits d'assurance pour propriétaires occupants.
In 2020, our insurance products allowed purchasers to purchase more than 94,000 housing units throughout Canada, whereas more than 16% in rural regions.
Portfolio insurance, which allows lenders to pool and insure low-ratio residential mortgages, making them eligible for our securitization programs. We insured close to 80,000 units through portfolio insurance in 2020. Enfin, nous assurons.
Finally, we guarantee the mortgage financing for the construction and purchase of residential collective community buildings. In 2020, our insurance products for community buildings contribute to the construction of more than 174,000 housing units.
CMHC implemented changes to our homeowner mortgage underwriting criteria in mid-2020. We also implemented a new restriction for refinancing on multi-unit loans. Under this restriction, we will only insure equity takeout financing if the proceeds are used to repair or reinvest in housing. La demande pour nos produits
The demand for insurance products has been strong in 2020 because the global volume increased of close to 97,989 housing units insured in comparison to 2019. And this increase is mainly attributable to the portfolio insurance because of the temporary flexibility that we've given to the criteria to be able to favor the liquidity in the market and respond to COVID-19.
By over 46,000 insured units as borrowers refinance loans to benefit from lower interest rates. At the end of 2020, our total insurance in force stood at $431 billion. Comme Romy l'a mentionné, nous avons
As mentioned by Romy, we have also offered some tools to people wanting a loan to be able to help borrowers, Canadian borrowers, who had financial difficulty due to COVID-19. This was a management tool in case of default, like the extending the loan amortization period, and then the capitalization of costs and other options as well.
Worked with lenders to allow mortgage payment deferrals for up to 6 months to help homeowners and multi-unit borrowers facing financial difficulties during the pandemic. Claims paid were lower in 2020 as a result of these measures, and borrowers deferred mortgage payments. The arrears rate was slightly higher in 2020 compared to 2019 due to higher reported delinquencies in all regions except for Atlantic Canada and Quebec, consistent with employment and house price trends in these regions. CMHC's loss ratio increased by 20% in 2020 compared to 2019, as the pandemic impacted our expected losses on our insurance contracts. La SCHL favorise la stabilité du système financier canadien.
CMHC favors the stability of Canada. Canada's finances by giving the mortgage financing. In 2020, we supported mortgage financing for close to 735,000 purchasers of houses in Canada.
During the pandemic. L'augmentation du plafond des émissions d'obligations.
The increase of the ceiling for the obligations and the reestablishment of the insured mortgage loans purchase program made sure that we increased our volumes in our products.
$2 billion in National Housing Act mortgage-backed securities and $53 billion in Canada mortgage bonds, an increase of $51 billion over 2019 as financial institutions accessed our programs for additional sources of liquidity. Guarantee and application fees received increased by $240 million due to higher volumes of Tier 2 mortgage-backed securities, which carry a higher guarantee fee. À la fin de 2020, nos cautionnements en vigueur totalisaient.
By the end of 2020, we were at a total of $489 billion. And the 2021 budget has confirmed that the Government of Canada will continue counting on CMHC to support Canadians and our economic recovery once COVID-19 is behind us.
Housing Agency, we will continue to respond and be there when Canadians need us most. Our 2030 aspiration is clear, and we will continue to manage the public resources entrusted to us prudently for the benefit of all Canadians. That concludes my presentation. J'aimerais me joindre à Romy.
I would like to join Romy and Derek to be able to thank our employees for their efforts throughout our vision of affordable housing for all. Our results we are owed to their dynamic and determination in their work, the work that they do. Thank you very much for your time.
Merci, Lisa. Nous en sommes maintenant à la période de questions.
Thank you, Lisa. We're now at the question and answer period for the annual general meeting.
Submitted online during the registration process. Questions will be answered in the order and in the language in which they were submitted. Our first question comes from Reza Alavi from St. Thomas. Reza asks, what is your prediction for the housing market in the next few years? To answer this question, I'll ask Patrick Perrier, our Deputy Chief Economist, to take it.
Hello, everyone. So thanks for the question. Indeed, this allows me to advertise that this coming Thursday, on May 6th, we will publish our 2021 edition of the CMHC Housing Market Outlook report. So I therefore invite everyone to consult our website this coming Thursday to access the forecast report. And the forecast will be presented in the report for the national housing market, as well as for close to 20 centers across the country. So you will understand, and please forgive me for this, that given this imminent release of the report, that I cannot disclose too much information as of now. I will say this, however, like most forecasters, we were surprised by the strong performance of housing markets in 2020, with the strength, as you know, coming mostly from the second half of the year. Over our forecast horizon, which is 2021-2023, we expect housing market activity to lose steam relative to its 2020 performance and to move closer to levels consistent with fundamental determinants of housing markets like economy, demography, and financial conditions. So thank you for your question. I hope this answers the question well. Thanks.
Merci, Patrick. Our next question is, could you please discuss the time frame and any details you may have at this time on the allocation of the newly announced additional funding for the Rapid Housing Initiative through the April 2021 budget? I'll ask Michelle Tremblay, Senior Vice President, Policy and Innovation, to answer this question.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for the question. Both the President and the Chair spoke about the success of the Rapid Housing Initiative in creating close to 4,800 homes across the country for Canadians in severe housing needs and those who were at risk of experiencing homelessness. They also spoke about the additional $1.5 billion in 21-22 to rapidly deploy housing. I will add to this that 25% of the $1.5 billion funding will go towards women-focused housing projects. We hope to create a minimum of 4,500 new affordable units. At this time, we don't have all the details, but we will communicate the details as soon as they become available.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Our next question is also in fact for you. What housing-related initiatives are provided for in the latest federal budget, and how will they advance the national housing strategy?
Thank you for the question. So obviously, as was mentioned, housing affordability continues to be a major priority for the government. We are very pleased to deliver on a number of these initiatives. As both Derek and Romy mentioned, Budget 2021 provided an additional $2.5 billion over 7 years and proposed to accelerate and reallocate $1.3 billion in existing funding. These will all support the national housing strategy and also help our own 2030 aspirational goal. The budget also has an added focus on climate change and support for women and children. In terms of funding, other than the $1.5 billion of rapid housing, the remaining $1 billion of funding will be made over 7 years and include the following: $600 million to renew and expand our Affordable Housing Innovation Fund. To date, this program has committed funding to support creation of over 17,000 units, including more than 16,000 which were affordable. The new funding is expected to support the creation of up to 12,700 more units. There is also $315.4 million through the Canada Housing Benefit to increase direct financial assistance for low-income women and children fleeing violence to help them with their rent payments. There is also $118.2 million which will be delivered through the Federal Community Housing Initiative to support community housing providers that deliver long-term housing to many of our most vulnerable people in Canada. With respect to the accelerated and reallocated fund, there will be $750 million of the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, which Romy mentioned. So this is accelerating funding from outer years. There is also a dedicated $250 million of the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, which will be specifically allocated to support the construction, the repair, and operating costs of an estimated 560 units of transitional housing and shelter spaces, again, for women and children fleeing violence. Finally, there's a $300 million in funding in 21-22 and 22-23, which will come from the Rental Construction Financing Initiative, which will be allocated to support the conversion of excess commercial property space into 800 units of market-based rental housing. And Romy also mentioned that we will be delivering $4.4 billion over 5 years for loans and administrative costs to help homeowners and small landlords to complete deep energy retrofits through interest-free loans of up to $40,000. That completes the answer, Jonathan.
Thank you, Michelle. Our next question, I have a small building lot that needs rezoning and official plan amendment to develop an affordable housing project. I am aware of the seed funding process. Will it be possible to get full construction financing for a 12 to 16 unit project? I'll ask Carla Staracina, Vice President, Risk Management, Strategy and Products, to answer this question. Carla?
So thank you so much for your planned contribution to affordable housing in Canada. And as you are aware of our seed funding program, I'm hopeful that you've been in touch with our specialist in your region. And part of what they can do is help you find the right construction financing program that works for you, whether it be our multi-loan insurance program for affordable housing, our rental construction financing initiative, or in partnership with others, our co-investment program. Working with you, we'll figure out the level of your affordability, accessibility, and climate change initiatives, and find the right financing that'll work to get your program off the ground. Thanks so much for your question, and good luck with your development.
Thank you, Carla. And our last question now from the public. Has CMHC calculated how many new housing units, how many repaired units, and how many housing benefits are needed to reach your 2030 goal that everyone has a home they can afford and that meets their needs? To answer this question, I'll turn it over to Romy Bowers, our President and CEO. Romy?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. And I'd like to start by stating that a theme that we've highlighted in many of the remarks so far, that the fact that the pandemic has really underscored the importance of a home and confirmed that our affordability strategy is more relevant and important than ever. To ensure that we're able to measure our progress towards achieving our aspiration, like many other organizations, we use a standardized approach to design performance measure, and we continually seek to improve our performance measurement practices. We set very ambitious targets, and as an example, by the end of 2020, our targets for national housing strategy measures are as follows. With respect to the number of new housing units committed through CMHC, the target is 48,290. With respect to the number of repaired housing units by 2020, our target is 72,800. We monitor our performance on an ongoing basis, and performance management is obviously very important in determining our resource allocation and other decisions. And in closing, I'd like to also state that our aspiration is not something that CMHC alone can achieve. And we are always working to strengthen existing partnerships with many players in the housing industry. And we're also very open to seeking new partnerships and ideas. Because we believe that in order to achieve our 2030 aspiration, we need to work more collaboratively with others. So it's an honor for me to take on the reins as the new CEO, and I look forward to not only delivering on existing programs, but working with others so that we can amplify our impact. So thank you very much, Jonathan, for that excellent question.
Thank you, Romy. We'll now move on to questions from members of the media. If you wish to ask a question, simply press star and then 1 on your telephone keypad. Again, I remind you that in order to submit a question, media reps will need to be on the conference call, as the webcast portion of this call does not permit you to ask questions from that platform. Chloe, I'll turn it over to you for the Q&A.
Thank you. Once again, participants, if you would like to ask a question, please signal by pressing star 1 on your telephone keypad. If you're using a speakerphone, please make sure your mute function is turned off to allow your signal to reach our equipment. Again, press star 1 to ask a question. We'll pause for just a moment to allow everyone an opportunity to signal for questions. Merci. Nous allons maintenant passer à la période de questions sur la ligne téléphonique.
So we're going to now move to the Q&A. If you're using a hands-free, you can use the dial pad. So if you want to ask a question, you have to press star 1 on your phone, and you can also cancel your call by with star 2. And please star 1 now if you want to ask a question. And there will be a short delay that will allow you to record yourself. So thank you so much for your patience.
And we will take our first question at this time. It comes from Rachel Young-Lee from Globe and Mail. Please go ahead.
Hi. I'm wondering, do you think the minimum qualifying rate for insured mortgages needs to be raised to 5.25% to match the OSFI proposal?
So thank you very much for that question. This is the answer to your question is something that the Department of Finance and the Minister of Finance would determine. CMHC would provide advice to the Minister of Finance, but that we're not able to share that advice with you at this time. Thank you.
Next question, Chloe, please.
We will take. Absolutely. We'll take our next question from Ari Alstetter from Bloomberg News. Please go ahead.
That's all right. My question was just asked, actually.
Okay, thanks, Ari. Let's take
as a reminder, participants. Absolutely. Just as a reminder, participants, you can remove yourself from the queue by pressing star 2 on your telephone keypad. We will now move on to the next question. It comes from Tara Deschamps from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Now that we are, I guess, having increased conversations around being in a housing bubble, I've heard a bit of chatter about whether it's time to return to, or sorry, not return to, but look to a more transparent bidding process. And I'm wondering if that's something CMHC would advocate for, or would see as being helpful to take off some of the pressure that we're seeing in the market right now.
I can take that one on. Thank you for the question. I suppose we would have to analyze. First of all, this would likely be provincial jurisdiction and not under the jurisdiction of the federal government. But I would say that anything that puts upwards pressure on demand for housing and increases prices is certainly something we would certainly encourage people to look at for sure.
La question qui suit vient de Philippe de Montigny de CBC News.
Sylvie de Montigny from CBC News. Go ahead. Thank you. So, the Cité Canadienne d'Hypothèques et Logement, I'm very surprised by the evaluation that's been given for most of the mortgage, and there's certain measures that you could have to be able to calm this mortgage fever that we're seeing this year.
Peut-être je pourrais commencer, un de mes collègues a ajouté.
Maybe I can start, one of my colleagues can add, but obviously we are all surprised by the over-evaluation of the heightened prices that has been put in terms of the fundamental, traditional fundamental indicators. And in terms of the short term, let's say the shorter term, we would like it that if the offer would react quicker at these increases in price. So this would be, I think, on a long-term basis, something that could have a little bit more of an impact to be able to moderate the pressure. So on a short term, obviously, there's a lot of factors that are at play. We published a report earlier, I think it was in February, I don't have the exact date, but we were looking at the special factors that were there. So by looking at what was happening, we understood that there were some special factors, including there was more of a demand in the first months of the pandemic, and we had an increase after that, and then that was quite strong to be able to go back to this strength. And there was unequal effects from the pandemic. Some people had increases, some decreases in their households, and there was a desire of maybe purchasing a bigger home, so did it have an impact on prices? So I'm not going to go forever on this, but there's a lot of different factors, and it's difficult to evaluate today what are all the exact causes and to come up with short-term measures. There's some that are proposed, but once again, there's several measures that are, each measure could have an impact. So that's why it's the government that needs to decide when it comes down to it. Thank you.
As a reminder, participants, that's *1 to ask a question at this time. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas à appuyer sur étoile 1.
Don't hesitate to hit *1 for any questions.
Zachary Goudreau from Goudreau, please go ahead.
Oui, bonjour.
Hello. I'd like to know actually up to what point the pandemic and this overbidding that we see, and especially in the large centers, it risks to maybe make things more complex for your targets for 2030 to have affordable housing for all. Is it going to impact some of your objectives? Because the situation becomes a lot more complex with the current overbidding tendency that we see in larger urban centers like Montreal, for example.
Merci pour la question. Peut-être je peux commencer, puis peut-être
Thank you for the question. Maybe I can start and others can add, but obviously the overbidding and the increasing prices for properties make it so that our objective is going to be a lot more difficult. As Patrick has mentioned, the long-term solution is that the supply passes the demand, and that would be for properties and also, but for housing, for renters. We are looking to having a certain rebalancing of the markets, and probably the pandemic in general, not just the increase of the prices of homes, made our challenge even larger now.
Merci beaucoup. Et peut-être, est-ce
Thank you. Could I ask a follow-up question? Yes, sure, go ahead. Okay. Yeah, so
on se souvient que
just because if we recall that your predictions, you were surprised that at the end we thought maybe that the prices were going to decrease. And finally, the prices continued to increase even quicker than if the pandemic hadn't even happened. I don't know if I'm wrong about that, but just could you explain what explains this? That really where we came out, it was completely not forecasted properly. Like it was way beyond our forecast. Well, maybe I could. Well, firstly, if we go to where we were about a year ago, when we published our report, we had the information that we had, and we were maybe in the worst part of the pandemic, and so we were seeing a recession, and rightly so, and the impact and the deterioration of the workforce, and also we had some provisions. Notably, we took some information of the announcements that had been done with the government up to that point. So all of that, the pandemic, today we have vaccinations that have been distributed to and the evolution was really has really increased and quicker than expected. We had some measures that were more significant than expected in governments, the federal government and provincial governments and the central bank. So, and then at the same time, there are some factors that I was explaining a little bit earlier where there was like a change. The pandemic didn't hit, unfortunately, equally the workers and households. So some households had the desire to purchase a home, often outside of the large centers, maybe even rural centers, but larger homes that were more expensive. So that had an impact on the price. So that's basically what I would say about this. Now, for more information about this, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in our report, there were some factors that were explained, and if we want that better performance than expected, and now we were able to meet for the predictions that are going to be published, and that's going to be in the region by region. Thank you very much.
It appears there are no further questions at this time, and I'd like to turn it back over to you. Nous n'avons plus de questions pour le moment. J'aimerais maintenant retourner la parole.
No more questions, so I would like to go back to you. Thank you. Thank you,
if
Chloe.
you have any additional questions or you need more information on any aspects of our business, you're encouraged to contact our media relations office at media@cmhc.ca. Pour ceux et celles qui n'en ont pas
For those who don't have a copy, the annual report for 2020 and other information products are available on our website at cmhc.ca.
I will turn things over now to Marie-Claude Tremblay. Marie-Claude.
Thank you, Jonathan. This brings to a close our annual public meeting and media briefing. Thank you again for joining us today. And as Jonathan just said, please visit our website or contact our media relations team if you're looking for more information. Alors, merci d'avoir participé et bonne journée.
Thank you so much for having participated, and we wish you a great day.